I'd like to announce the next session, which is a book launch for the book The Party Worker by Umar Shahid Hamid. I'd like to call Umar Shahid on stage. Our next, yes, going be. Our next guest is Preeti Shenoy, and Bilal Tanveer will be the moderator of the session. If you can please come on stage. Bilal Tanveer will be the moderator for the session. He is the author of the award-winning novel, The Scatter Here is Too Great. He has also translated 2 books and teaches in the English program at LUMS Lahore. Bilal.
Is this working? Yeah, it's working. Excellent. Okay. Is it 12:15 yet? Thank you all for coming. It's my pleasure, of course, and honor to host this book launch of Umar Shahid Hamid's 3rd novel, The Party Worker. Please give him a hand. We also have with us Preeti Shenoy, who is a writer, who's a best-selling writer in India. I'm going to read out their profiles so that you have a better idea of of the writers that are sitting with you, and then we can begin the conversation. Yes, sure. Excellent. Umar Shahid Hamid has served as a senior counter-terrorism officer in the Karachi Police and Pakistan Intelligence Bureau for 14 years now. Following that, he has worked for several political risk firms in the City of London, including Exclusive Analysis, IHS Janes, and IHS Markit. He holds a Master's in Law from University College London and a Master's in Criminal Justice Policy from the London School of Economics. He has been a frequent contributor on media, appearing in major international publications and media outlets like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Reuters, AFP, AP, The Times of London, BBC, France 24, CNN, Bloomberg, and Channel News Asia. He has written 2 best-selling books, The Prisoner and The Spinner's Tale. His latest novel, The Party Worker, is being released as we speak now. Sure, go ahead. Preeti Shenoy is among the top 5 highest-selling authors in India and is the highest-selling woman writer in India. Listed on Forbes' long list of the most influential celebrities in India, she has also been named as being unique for being the only woman in the best-selling league in India today. Her books include It's All in the Planets, Why We Love the Way We Do, which I recommend reading because it has all the questions answered about love that you have, and I had. The Secret Wish List. Your relationship? I'm still thinking. The one you cannot have, and many others. She's been awarded the Academia Award for Business Excellence by the New Delhi Institute of Management and has received the 100 Young Indian Women Achievers Award in the Powerful Leader category. She has a very popular blog and also writes a weekly column in the Financial Chronicle. Okay. Let me pull out my list of questions and then we can start. Umar, congratulations.
Thank you.
This is your 3rd book.
To you. For Love
for
in
hosting
Chakiwada.
this.
No, For Love in Chakiwada.
Thank you.
Perhaps
It's very
the
nice of
best
you.
name of a novel that I've ever seen.
And other misadventures. Um, so this is your third book. In 4 years, 2013 to 2017.
Yeah.
Yes. How do you see yourself evolving as a writer during this period in the process of writing these 3 books?
I think, I'm sorry,
You can pull it out.
is this better? This is the first time someone has said that they can't hear me. I think I find that when I was going over the proofs of the party worker, that in my eyes, obviously, every reader will have a different perspective, but I have found myself to have matured tremendously as a writer. And I think for me, especially because, when I wrote my first book, I didn't come from any kind of creative writing background, in the sense that it wasn't something that I was trained in, or even something that I had done, even for sort of, for fun prior to that. So by kind of writing more and more, I feel that I'm fashioning my craft. It's slowly getting better, at least in my eyes. So and it's very interesting, to take say passages, and I'm sure that it's the same with you, Preeti, if you compare your earlier work to what you've done more recently, comparing passages from, let's say, The Prisoner to things that I've written in The Party Worker, and to see the evolution of the language, the structure of the story, and things like that.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true. I think your first book, The Prisoner, was more of a straighter narrative, but this time around, actually, what's quite fascinating is you see a broadening. You see a broadening in terms of themes, and also in terms of the structure. The structure is much more sophisticated. It's much more, it involves it involves several narratives. There is a journalist, there is an assassin, there are 2 detectives who are working in New York, and what else? There is a Parsi Seth as well, who's one of the richest people in Pakistan. But believe you me, the great thing about it is that despite having all of these things, it still reads like a damn good thriller. You cannot put it down. It's a thrilling read. Preeti, you've also read, obviously, Umar's book, and I'm sure you've got things to say about that.
Yes, totally, yeah.
But, I would want you to reflect a little bit on, whatever you've read. What are your views on Umar's book?
I completely agree with Omar when he says that an author's first book, even though it's your first baby, when you write the second and the third and the fourth, and then you go back and read the first, you are like, oh my God, I'm so much better now. So much so that I hide my first book. You won't find it anywhere. The first one is called 34 Bubblegums and Candies. So now I have written 8 books. So now I told my publisher, when I read that, I said, I cringe. Though a lot of people read it and they tell me, we loved your book. So I'm like, okay, but read my other ones. They are better, And I read Omar's first book. I loved it. So I'm sure as an author, you would feel, I can relate to what you feel as an author. And I read his second book, and I must tell you, the first one itself was unputdownable for me. I loved it because it gave me a completely different perspective. So much so that, and by the way, this is the first time I'm coming to Pakistan and the first time in Karachi. And after I read Omar's book, I felt great to be here. I was so excited to come here. And then my husband asked me, he said, how is Karachi? So I looked around, I said, it's just like India, I said, it's exactly like that. And after I read your book, I was looking at the police officers there, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm relating it to what he has written. And definitely we evolve as writers. I can see that in Omar's book too. I can see a lot in my book. So my 8th book is something, the first book I'm proud of because that's the first time you're getting published. You don't even know if somebody is going to publish what you're writing. And so the first book you just kind of write it because you're not even sure anyone will read it or anyone will publish it. But when it's the 6th or the 7th or the 8th book, then there's a certain expectation, and also you have grown as a writer.
I think it's also, I find that because you are, as you said, Preeti, self-critical as a writer,
Yes.
that, when people come up to you and say, yeah, we really loved your first book the most.
Yeah.
And you're thanking them, but you're saying, but actually the other ones, the
Better,
writing and all
yes.
is better.
But so a follow-up question: has writing become any easier for you guys?
Easier? No. People ask me, what's the hardest thing about writing? They ask me this all the time. And I tell them it's to find uninterrupted time because I'm a full-time mom, and that will be the last thing one would expect as a writer. Someone would think plot and this and that. I said no, just to find that solitary time. I wouldn't say it's become easier, or I don't think writing ever becomes easier, because as I feel as a writer, I'm constantly learning. With each book I'm evolving, and each thing different. And then when I read any other author's book, I'm like, wow, this person writes so well. Oh my God, that little comparison. I don't know if it's the same with you.
Absolutely.
I'm like, this is brilliant. My work, oh my God, I have to evolve to that level. That's what I felt when I read your book too, Bilal. So, when I was...
Bad book, don't read it. Umar, has writing become easier?
It's become an addiction. But in terms of easier, the problem I find now, especially in the last 5-6 months, is finding the time. As Preeti said, coming back to, having moved back to Pakistan and being in a very full-on job. So I feel that I miss my fix because it's very much a drug. I think it regulates other parts of my life.
That's very interesting. One of the big pleasures for me when I read The Prisoners, read The Prisoner, not The Prisoners, by Umar was just to see the 1990s Karachi that I grew up in. And that I knew intimately. And as I was reading it, I realized that actually I've never read any story that has represented Karachi of the 90s. And I think Umar's book was the first one that actually tackled that, and did a fantastic job of it. And now you have moved forward in chronology. But I would want to ask your view on what your relationship has been to Karachi. How has it changed? How has it changed when you became a cop first, and then you became a writer? It's been now 4 years. You've published 3 books. How do you see your relationship to the city change?
Bilal, I think, and as a Karachiite living in exile in Lahore, of all places, you will probably agree with me that Karachi is a sort of city that is always, that always remains in your blood, no matter where you are geographically. For me personally, it's been the place where I was born. It's the place where I have met my greatest successes and the greatest, failures or, down moments of my life. It changed a lot when I became a police officer, because I looked at the city from a totally different point of view. It changed even more when I started writing, because I looked at the city and its various dynamics from another different critical point of view. And it's, now having come back to Karachi, having been away for 5 years, again, for me, the prism has changed just a little bit. So it's something that, for me, you can't really get away from it. And as life goes on, as you become older, it changed for me also, depending on what age you're in when you're looking at the city. When I was 25, Karachi looked like a very different place. When I'm 39, Karachi looks like a very different place.
In what term? Can you be a little more specific?
I think it's to do with the perceptions of things. For instance, I always say this, that my perception of police in Karachi changed a lot. Obviously, when I was in school or when I was much younger, I had a very different perception of the police, usually largely a negative perception of the police. When I became a police officer, I changed, my perception changed radically. I became far more understanding, and as I grow older as a police officer, I also find that the same perception is changing again, in the sense that there have been times when I have now moved from being, perhaps blindly supportive of some of the things that the police may do, to being a little more objective about it.
What might be the examples of such things?
I think the most interesting one for me is extrajudicial killings or encounter killings. And I've always said this at various levels, that you cannot, as someone who upholds the law, condone encounter killings. But at the same time, you have to be a police officer in Karachi, facing a brunt of various criminal and militant groups, having to pick up the bodies of your colleagues on a daily basis, and also having to see the failures of a flawed, dramatically flawed criminal justice system at the same time, to kind of have developed an understanding that yes, this may be incorrect, but at times it's the only way out of a situation. And similarly, as I now grow, as I said, now having grown older and grayer as a police officer, you also see, what you might have condoned with a much greater degree of enthusiasm when you were younger. You kind of now become a little more reserved. I find that I've become a little more reserved about condoning encounter killings, in the sense that I might still say that it may be a necessary evil, but you also become more critical in terms of how the police uses it, and how often it's something that is, as a tool of enforcement, it's misused. So I think going through that sort of metamorphosis over the years is interesting.
That's very interesting. Preeti, you are based in Bangalore.
That is right,
yes. Which is a relatively peaceful city, I would imagine, compared
Very.
to
Except for New Year's,
compared
apparently.
to
Yeah,
Karachi.
that I think was a little bit blown out of proportion. A little bit, like media does love to kind of,
Sure.
and then everyone likes to get on board. But otherwise, Bangalore is relatively safe.
So tell us a little bit about your relationship to places and how those places figure in your fiction.
So it's very interesting, because I think where we live in and what we are surrounded by, that tends to reflect a lot in our work. So I have grown up in different cities all over India. I have never lived in a city for more than 3 years consecutively, because my dad had a transferable job. So every 3 years we were moving, and after I got married, my husband had a similar kind of job. So, and I think that has kind of enriched me, because the cities I've lived in Pune, Pondicherry, Mangalore, Kerala. I've lived in so many cities in India, and that does tend to reflect in my work. And for a brief while, I lived in the UK, and where I came across a Bipolar Artists Association. So my second book is about this girl with bipolar disorder. So that kind of got me interested, because I said, okay, these people have bipolar disorder, and yet they are creating amazing works of art. I'm an artist too. I paint, I do portraits. And so when I think the places where we have been, we find something in those places, and that kind of reflects in your work. So each of my books you will find is set in a different city. And I know these cities so well, because when you move to a new city, the only weapon that you have is, the one of familiarity. So you better go out there, you better get to know the streets, because otherwise you'll never feel at home.
Yeah.
If you are going to sit like an outsider. So every city I went to, I merged. I speak 6 languages, 6 Indian languages.
Wow.
So I learnt the languages, because that is the best way to get to know a place.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that reflects in my writing. So a lot of people, when they read, when a book is set in Chennai, when they read, they say, it's so nice, you featured this, you featured Elliot's Beach, and you featured this, because I've lived in those places. So it gives a very real feel, and that's what I found in your books too. Karachi, I got a very real feel of what it is like.
Yeah, writers
So-
are usually great mimics, no? They love to mimic, they love to learn languages, they love to acquire different accents, different dialects, and that sort of comes across in their works. I think the other thing that I wanted to ask you, both of you, is to think about, what is your reading universe like? What are the books that you feel have shaped you, you look up to? Once I attended a seminar with Richard Ford, and he said that, every morning I basically read a Chekhov story before starting out, and I tell myself, this is how you could have to be. And so I'm just wondering, what is your relationship to reading like? What are the books that have formed you as a writer that you continue to look up to? Has that changed? How has that changed? Have you discovered any new exciting writer that you would like us to know about?
So I think when it comes to my reading taste and my writing, I think I'm schizophrenic because my novels tend to be very happy and positive and great and feel good. And now my short stories are coming out, and they tend to be dark, really dark with absolutely no redemption. And so that's going to be launched shortly, the short story. It's coming out on 14th of February. And interestingly, now that you asked the question, that's when I'm thinking, I think my reading also tends to be that way. Like one of my favorite work is Roald Dahl, not what he has written for children, but the dark stories that he has written for adults. I absolutely love it. So earlier on in the media interviews, they used to ask me, what are your favorite books? So I used to tell them Roald Dahl for adults. And then they'll say, oh, we've never heard anyone saying that is their favorite work because it's so dark. But I do love books like Mitch Albom Tuesdays with Maury. That's, I would say, one of the books that has shaped me. And then there's Paul Kalani's When Breath Becomes Air, which I thought was brilliant. I was so moved after reading that book. Donna Markova, I Will Not Die, An Unlived Life. That remains a very inspirational book. I read Audrey Niffenegger, Her Fearful Symmetry. That's another favorite book of mine. Time Traveler's Wife. So my reading does tend to be very varied. It's very varied, and I think yes, I guess it reflects in my writing too. I'm not sure. A lot of people ask me, what are your writing influences? So I always say I write like myself because I can't write like anybody else, nor do I aspire to write like anyone else. But that's a very interesting question, and of course I have always read, because every place I moved to, like I mentioned, I was not in a place for more than 3 years. But everywhere I moved to, my dad would ensure that our books moved with us. So books were this constant grounding presence in my life. So every city that I went to, my dad would ensure we would go and join a library and we would borrow books. And that has continued. So when we were moving back from UK to India, we had these 2 huge containers which we could ship to India, and I didn't have that much stuff. So every afternoon I used to go to the small lanes of Norwich. I used to visit the charity shops, and I used to pick those books, and I shipped back a whole lot of books. So now it's like one big treasure trove. I have reading materials
Great.
for a lifetime. There are obscure British authors which nobody would have heard of. Because these are books which I found in small lanes and charity shops and things like that. So that I feel books are like one wonderful thing. You start me off on books, I think I'll go on to the end of the session about books.
Omar?
So I think we should ask Omar.
I think I'm also a bit schizophrenic when it comes to my reading habits, in the sense that you will find the strangest combinations if you sort of were to look at my bedside table. But I think that that helps when I'm writing. It helps in the sense that I'm interested in stuff that will not necessarily come, or worlds that won't be, that aren't accessible to me. because I feel that it's interesting to kind of pick up stuff from, and I often find, in fact, especially now, reading all sorts of, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, that you get tremendous ideas. Funny that you ask. Not that he's necessarily one of my favorite authors, but last week I was reading Karan Johar's autobiography, and he doesn't speak to Kajol, by the way. So, FYI. But just reading that, it was interesting because even though anything that I've written so far has nothing to do with celebrity or Bollywood or anything like that, but the stories that he was telling in that autobiography fascinated me because you can sort of see a light bulb go off with me thinking this is something that can be adapted in the future. Another one which you'll find interesting is I was reading the Justice Qayyum Commission report on match fixing, which again I thought was match fixing in cricket in Pakistan, for those of you who aren't aware of that. And I found reading that I got about 10 ideas for stories. So
I'm sure because your cricket features very heavily in your books.
Yeah, I think it'll feature even more in the next one.
There you go.
Because I think in Pakistan it's really a morality play.
That's very interesting. Say
more
something.
Than a sport.
Say something. That's very interesting.
No, I just it's even though, as I said, again picking up the point of the Qayyum Commission report, of course it's a judicial commission report which is by definition extremely dry, but what it does, when you're looking at it as a writer, what it did do for me at least was that it kind of triggered this debate in my mind about there are these individuals who are sportsmen, who are sort of the pride of their nation. They're sort of raised on a pedestal by millions of fans. They have talent that normal people don't have. Mm-hmm. And so, but something nonetheless happens that drives them around a very, very slippery slope. When it comes to things like match fixing, when essentially what they're doing is inverting every code that they've lived by for this, in the pursuit of this. And that's why I said that it becomes far more than the descriptions of cricket or whatever. For me, it became or it becomes a morality play of how a man descends into a very dark space.
Yeah, I think that's been your running concern in your books, to think about how these characters who are from very, often very humble, quite nice backgrounds, they move into these very dark and transform into very dark characters who are assassins, murderers, whatnot. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think so, because I think in all of my books, and you'll find this in the Party Worker as well, I never wanted to make caricatures of negative characters or bad guys, so to speak, because there has to be some process behind why someone turns into something that we might find abhorrent or that we might define as evil. It doesn't happen overnight. There have to be some triggers. And for me, the most interesting part of writing these books has been, and indeed in my continuing writing, is trying to explore those triggers of why people do things that you would balk at normally.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and perhaps I can make a broader question out of it and also place it to Preeti. Writers have different attitudes toward writing, right? I mean, some writers write in order to exact a revenge on a really horrible life that they've lived. Some writers write in order to, as you were saying, explore certain questions. Certain writers are writing because they have questions to themselves and to society, or God even, that they're looking for answers. So I mean, that's something perhaps that you could tell us a little bit about, like what defines your relationship, what sort of questions define your relationship to writing.
So for me, I have always written, ever since I learned how to hold a pen, I have written. And my first book was at the age of 8. And no, I was not some kind of child genius.
That's impressive.
No, I was not some kind of child genius. The book was 6 pages long.
And that's not one of the 8 books that she's published. Huh?
No, that's not one of the 8 books. And 2 pages were illustrations and 4 pages were writing. In my best impression of, that, because that was the maximum I could write. At that time I used to wonder, how are all these authors writing 200, 300 pages? I had no idea.
I still wonder.
I still wonder that.
No, now I know it's page by page, word by word. There's only one formula for writing, which is BIC, which is butt in chair. You just put your butt on chair and keep writing, keep going till you complete a book. But for me, the relationship with writing, for me, it's like, it's like breathing, because I have maintained journals, I maintain diaries in order to make sense of the world around me. I write to explore what my thoughts are, and I discover that I think better when I write. And I used to always take part in short story competitions and essays, and I used to win prizes and all that, but I never thought I would get published. So that actually happened quite by accident. Like in 2006, I lost my father, whom I was very close to, and it was grief. It was grief like I have never encountered before. And he was hale and hearty. One moment he was fine, other moment he was gone. And in order to get over that, so that was kind of a perspective shift for me. That it's like unless you face death like that, it never hits you with that enormity. The enormity with which it hit me was tremendous. So I started writing a blog in 2006, and it was anonymous because I said on the internet, I don't know what I'm getting into, I don't want people to know who I am. So anonymously I started a blog, and that became very popular. So one of my posts got picked up by a radio show host in the US, and it won the Perfect Post Award, and that post was about my dad. So, and then a lot of people started writing to me. They wanted to see who I was. And then, and then I started writing for local newspapers. So I went and approached them. I said, okay, this is an option which I can explore. So I wrote for local newspapers, and I wrote for Times of India, Reader's Digest. Then I wrote a lot of stories for Chicken Soup for the Soul. And then a lot of people told me, your blog, why don't you put it all together in a book? So by then I started receiving so many emails and messages from people all over the world. People started sending me gifts from all over the world after reading my blog, which I found very touching. Like someone, sent me a scarf from Argentina. She weaved it herself and sent it because the stuff I
can't relate at all. Huh?
Sorry?
I cannot relate.
तुम्हें कभी अर्जेंटीना से स्कार्फ नहीं मिला?
नहीं, मुझे चकलाला से गालियाँ आई हैं सिर्फ.
Because the stuff I was writing about was something which was deeply moving them in some way. They could relate. Because I decided I would not write anything about, I would not write anything negative. I wanted, because I was in that place, where I wanted to explore only the positive aspects of my life. I didn't want. So when you read my work, it's like a very positive feel-good factor. So that kind of, struck resonance with me, and that's how I grew as a writer. And that was my first book, which I hide now. And after that, I've evolved. Then there was a second, third, fourth, and now I've written 8 books. So for me, this thing with writing is a very close relationship which helps me to make sense of the world.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way of summing it, actually. Umar, your relationship to writing, questions that are important to you?
I was going through your book. It's in the planets.
It's all in the planets. Yes.
And this point that you speak about, Preeti, about your books, especially your long form books, being very positive,
yes,
happy. I'm fascinated, and then at the same time you say that the short stories that you started writing are much darker.
Very dark, yes.
I'm fascinated by that because I think as a writer, you're always kind of, I find, I'm always interested in trying to do something different and new, right? You kind of you do a certain type of book, and then like if you would ask me, I would love to write a book like it's
All in the
on the planets, right? Because that's something that I think I cannot do. Whether it's just the inherent skeptic in me, or whether it's the fact that I have sort of written, the stuff I've written is very genre, dark, noiresque. But for me, the challenge is writing, things that in the future, hopefully, writing things that would be totally unconnected to the work that I've done previously.
Okay, we have about 25 minutes left. Okay, so I'm going to ask Umar to read a little bit from his book. But before that, I'm going to place a question to him, which I know someone will ask. I'm just going to get it out of the way. This is about representing Pakistan. Huh? So you write about, what would you call the dark underbelly of Karachi, about jihadists, about terrorism, terrorists, cops who are going after them. Don't people say to you that, like, look, this is negative stuff about Pakistan, don't write it, you have to project a positive image of the country? How do you respond to that? I'm just, because I get asked that question a lot.
This is, I presume, the Sharmeen Abair Chinoy question.
I don't know what that means, but
look, I think in the books that I've written, I've tried to give a realistic portrayal of what goes on in a certain world. Some of it is negative, some of it is positive, or I should say there are positives in it. But I think for me, the greatest sort of service that you can do is putting out a realistic portrayal. And I think, certainly with The Prisoner, so the feedback that I got from a lot of people was that, because I think if I was to write something that was sort of that portrayed, let's say, the police or jihadists for that matter in a positive light, no one would buy it. No one would buy that concept, right? Because it would be factually incorrect. I think the biggest sort of thing that I can try to do as a writer is to portray any of the protagonists, whatever their background may be, whether they're police officers, whether they are jihadists, whether they are activists of a political party, in as realistic and human a light as possible. Because at the end of the day, these are individuals who have certain motivations. Some of those motivations will be good, some of them will be bad. But that's I think where you really sort of earn your money as a writer. If you can empathize, you may not agree with, but if you can end up empathizing with those characters when you're reading the book, then I think I've done my job.
Excellent. Would you like to read?
Not really, but if you insist.
I do. I'm sure people would love to hear some excerpt. Okay. Oh, you're going to pull off that, I'm going to read the first 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, aur kya karu?
Sure.
Watch the ball onto the bat. He sees the sunlight glint off the metal surface of the baseball bat as the boy swings it in desperation, and not having heeded his silent admonition, fails to connect with the ball altogether. Asad Haider holds his head and sighs as the dejected little leaguer walks back to the dugout. And then he smiles at himself, wondering why it should matter to him whether the boy connected with the bat or not. It's not his boy, nor is it his game. He has never played baseball, only cricket. But there is something about games involving bats and balls that never fails to draw him in, even at a time like this, as he stands in Central Park waiting for the most important meeting of his life. In fact, that isn't true. The most important meeting of Asad Haider's life occurred yesterday, when he betrayed the man and the party that have been his life for the past 28 years. This meeting is simply a follow-up, the claiming of an insurance policy to ensure that he stays alive after his great betrayal. The emotion of yesterday has passed, and Asad Haider doesn't ponder over what has happened. The only thing that's important now is to keep his guard up and be prepared for whatever comes next. He discards his half-eaten hot dog and walks away from the playing fields in Central Park towards the 79th Street exit on the Upper West Side. He's a tall man and he retains the taut, muscular body of his youth, making him look younger than his 45 years, despite his shock of salt and pepper hair. So, very much modeled on you. His most striking feature are his eyes, grey-green, almost reptilian, as they dart around, scanning the hundreds of New Yorkers who've rushed to the park today to enjoy the first real hint of spring after a bitter cold winter. Even on a day like this and in a place like this, surrounded by casual revelers celebrating the sunlight, Asad Haider stands out, his body a coiled spring, ready to react instantly to any kind of situation. He pauses at the park entrance and looks across Central Park West to his destination, the Museum of Natural History. He waits a full 5 minutes, taking everything in. Then he spots his contact, a slightly overweight Pakistani man wearing a battered old New York Jets jacket, get out of a taxi and walk up the steps of the museum. The man seems a bit puzzled by the location, but that's a deliberate move on Asad's part. He's spent enough time as the party's chief hitman to not leave anything to chance. He wants a meeting in a place that is guaranteed to be unfrequented not just by members of the party, but by Pakistanis living in New York in general. Yes, absolutely no better place than a museum then.
You want to finish with it? He just left out the most thrilling cliffhanger bit. Okay. Let's open it up for questions. Questions. Okay. There is a lady over here. Can we have the mic here? Thank you.
So, first of all, on behalf of all your well-wishers, congratulations on the book and the award that you won yesterday, Omar.
Sorry, I forgot to plug that in. I'm a bad moderator.
So I've asked Omar this question in private, but I'm going to put him on the spot and ask it now in front of everyone else. How literal are your inspirations as far as the characters? And if they are literal, if you are drawing inspiration from actual people that you've come across, do you make any effort to muddy it and mix it up so those of us who live in Karachi and have grown up here cannot recognize exactly who you're talking about?
Yeah, he did muddy up the character that was inspired by me.
I think when I wrote my first book, I think a lot of the characters in The Prisoner were literal. So, there were people that I had come across, and I think this was a function of inexperience as a writer, that I kind of took the entire sort of sketch and placed it into that character. As I've written more and more with The Party Worker and before that The Spinner's Tale, I found that now I tend to take bits and pieces of personality from different real life characters and mix them up, because that tends to be more fun as a writer, rather than simply sort of filling in a sketch. So to answer your question, certainly as far as The Party Worker is concerned, there are lots of muddied sketches, though you might not think so.
Okay, lady over there. Yes.
Thank you. Sir, I wanted to ask, okay, so I'm basically here on behalf of my father. He couldn't be here. He read The Prisoner. It's the first book he's ever read in his life, and he absolutely loved it. And one of the things, seriously, and the thing that he loved about it was how it gave an insight into policemanوں کی life. So I wanted to know, have you ever gotten any feedback or anything from your fraternity of police people or something? Also, can you please sign the book later?
He will sign all the books that you like. Then we'll move to the...
Just to clarify your question, because I didn't hear the last part of it. So you're asking me if I got any feedback from other police officers about the book? Yeah? Yeah, I think for the longest time, and I suppose that was because I wasn't living here for a while, for the longest time I thought that none of my colleagues had read my book, because none of them had the time to do so. I have subsequently found that a large number of them have read it, and I think there may be exceptions here and there, but by and large they've been overwhelmingly positive about it, and the reason for that is that I think they appreciate what is, in my view, a very realistic portrayal of the lives of police officers. They're not white, they're not black, like most things in life. They're colored in shades of grey, and at the same time, they are lives that are tremendous. It's a profession, especially in Pakistan, that is tremendously challenging, that is tremendously risky, and it's a very tough life, without any sort of in many cases without getting any sort of kudos for the service that they do. So I think most of them, I'm sure there are some here in the audience as well who might disagree and might say that it was a horrible book that should never have been written, but
none of
most
them are here. Those people did not come to this session.
I made sure of that. They've been very positive. They've appreciated the realistic. Even though, as I said, if you read the book, it's not an overwhelmingly positive portrayal. I talk about things like corruption, like circumventing the law at times that happen in the police, and I don't think that we can shy away from that, because that's also as much a part of the characters that we are as anything else.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Omar. As you know, I'm a great fan of your books. I haven't read the latest one. What I want to know, as a novelist, how, the books are centered in Pakistan, Spinner's Tale also features England. How accessible do you think your books are to a non-Pakistani readership? And how important is that to you as a novelist, that you reach beyond, and that the message you give it doesn't have to be that it's a positive message, but it's an accurate message. And also, as your pride in being a novelist, that you're going to find that as you get better and better, more and more well known, you get the sort of foreign readership as well, which will mean you're an international bestseller, as well as being a Pakistani bestseller.
Thanks, Victoria. I think it's always been my sort of belief that if you tell a good story, that story will resonate with you wherever your audience may be. An example I've given in the past is a novel like, let's say, The Godfather, which you don't have to have been born in New York or indeed in Sicily to enjoy or for that book to resonate with you. I'm sure it's a book that resonates with many Pakistanis and Indians indeed.
No, totally. I can so vouch for that, because this world that you portray is so far removed from anything I have come across. It's nothing but, I could relate to the book, and it was a huge eye-opener. So people would love to read that, especially since you brought the human angle to it. It's not just cardboard characters, it's so real, it's so vivid, it's so real. Yeah. So definitely I think even a non-Pakistani would be able to relate, understand. So
I think it's worth mentioning that Omar's books have been translated. I think German translation, also a French translation, I imagine.
French translation's on the way, and as of this morning, an Italian one.
There you go. Well, okay. This gentleman. Yeah, we need to have a gent, obviously.
Gent. Omar, this is a question I've posed to a few of my friends who are in the police service in India and who have written crime fiction novels. Do you find yourself holding back sometimes, being in the position that you are in life, in public life? Do you find yourself holding back and saying, I can't talk about this because I'm, a police officer, and or this is too sensitive.
Keep my job.
Yeah, or this is too sensitive for me to kind of even venture into. This is just a question for you. Yeah.
Yes, and I'll tell you how. I think if certainly what I've seen in my career is we see, as police officers, we see the craziest stuff. You would not believe it if I told you. And I think in all my books, I actually feel that the versions that I put out are very watered down versions of things that have actually happened. And even with that watering down, a lot of the sort of feedback for all the books has been that we can't believe that there's a world out there like this, and not just people who are not from Pakistan. This is a comment that a lot of Karachiites indeed also made, that we've lived in the city all our lives and we never understood that these dynamics, and can things really be this complex or this difficult. And what I like to say to them is, you haven't seen anything yet. Just to quickly address your point about Urdu translations, it's something that I never sort of really planned on when I started writing. Not for any other reason, just I'm not competent to write in Urdu. I think, though, it has been suggested to me that to make the books accessible to a much wider audience, they should be translated into Urdu. It's certainly something that as time goes by, I think is more and more important. I think there's certainly a point in that if there are stories and people want to know these stories, and a much larger audience can be accessed by translations in Urdu, certainly I should and I would hope to try and do that in the future.
Okay, sorry, lady over here, sorry. I think we will need it for the recordings.
Just wanted to say I'm a huge fan, and I had a question for both of you. Preeti said that you started writing at 8. You published your first book when you were 8 years old.
No, it was not published. It was just written and kept in my file, hidden from everyone else.
I wanted to ask if it was published, how did it get published? But you're saying
no one would publish
sell
a
the rights now,
exactly. That's a very good idea.
Sorry?
Because
an original Preeti Shenoy,
and in handwritten, and I still have it. I think
it's about time you publish it.
Sorry?
I think it's about time you publish it.
Yeah, the 6-page story.
Yeah, call it the 6-page story.
Six-page story, out of which 2 are illustrations. That's Omar has given me a great idea. Yeah.
Sorry, the question.
Umar Saab se question ye hai कि, like Preeti said, she knew from the beginning she wanted to be a writer.
Sorry, can you speak a little louder? Yes.
Preeti said that she knew from a very young age she wanted to be a writer. For you, when did you find out, and how did this come about? Also, do you enjoy being a police officer more than a writer?
Good one.
I still don't know if I'm a writer. To answer the first one, I think it's something, as I've said to Bilal earlier, it's become a bit of an addiction. I feel it's something that I need to do. But talking about whether I prefer being a police officer or a writer, I have always been a police officer. That's how I define myself. Writing is something that has happened, and I've been very fortunate that it's something that sort of came into my life. But I honestly don't sort of define myself or see myself ever as a writer. It's something I do. I tell stories, but I still very much see myself as a police officer fundamentally.
Okay, there is a hand over there. Yes, please.
Umar, there's always an angle of cricket in your books, and you've just mentioned that you were reading the Justice Qayyum report, and there's not been much in the way of fiction in cricket writing apart from the Chinaman. So can we hope for a cricket fiction book from you in the future, especially since there's a huge criminal angle related to cricket in our part of the world?
You see, this is a great question, because this is where I get to plug my next book.
Go for it.
Or did I just leave it?
In fact, I started work on a 4th book, which is based on cricket and the tale of match fixing in cricket. Because to me, as a cricket fan, I find that it's the greatest story that no one ever told. Mostly for libel reasons, but also the fact that I think it was, as I kind of started getting into this about the whole thing of match fixing, and especially going back to the 1990s and the early 2000s, it's a story that we as Pakistanis didn't want to confront. You know, it was the biggest lie ever told. It was something that we could not come to terms with, because it meant that we had to question a lot of the people that were idols for us. And as a writer, that is just fantastic, sort of material to work with. As I said, cricket in Pakistan is a morality play more than a sport. So that's something that I'm working on right now.
Excellent. Okay, maybe one more question. Okay, there is no one from here who's ever asked a question. Yeah, there are a lot of people there. Okay, lady here.
Hi, my name is Dr. Lubna, and Prisoner was the first book which was given to me as a gift, and I loved it. I was just wondering if in your next cricket sort of based book, will you be outing some of our famous, heroes, role models,
It's a novel, right? So I don't think you should sort of get too tied up in which character is who. And indeed, that's not just for the book I'm writing. It's for any of these books. They're all novels. The characters are all fictional. Of course, they reflect a lot of the realities or the situations or things that we have seen, or whether as citizens of Karachi or as citizens of this country, or as indeed cricket fans. So it's not necessarily based on individuals. It's the events and the fictionalization of those that are more interesting, and the emotions that kind of trying to explore that angle of it.
Yeah, I think that the great thing about Umar's book is that it's not very difficult to guess who's he's talking about. So
I was just wondering.
So I don't think that that's ever been a worry with at least with Umar. He's not a very good liar. Okay, there is one hand over there, one very enthusiastic hand over there. Yes, please. This would be our last question. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Rashta. I just wanted to ask Umar, he talked a lot about Justice Qayyum's commission report and the ideas that generated. Wanted to know if you have read or plan to read Qazi Faiz Ishaq's commission report.
I have not, largely because it's not about cricket. But no, that is definitely an error on my part. I haven't read it.
Okay. Yeah, sure, madam. Sure.
Since you people, both of you, are experimenting and exploring more about yourselves as well as about people around you, have you ever thought of writing from the opposite sex's point of view, like Umar, from the point of view of a woman in Pakistan and what she encounters when she is faced with such violence in our society, which is against women, most of it? And you too, Preeti?
I have written 2 books from the male point of view, and I had to do so much of research to write that book because I wanted to get it exactly right. So I would call up all my male friends and, is this how you feel? Is this what you feel? And then I would joke with my women friends that I'm thinking so much like a guy that I might make a pass at you. So, I was telling that to my women friends because it is a completely different perspective that you get when you write from the other sex's point of view. The core emotions remain the same, but simply because there are, physical differences, the way you think about things, the way you behave, the way you the way you approach things, there is a difference, and I think that has made me grow as a writer. Because my first 3 books were from a woman's perspective, and then a lot of guys started telling me, why don't you tell our stories? Why don't you write from a male perspective? And that's when I explored it, and I feel very good. I feel that has helped me to grow as a writer. And the feedback that I've got, it's there on my social media and all my on all the reviews, that you've got the male perspective exactly right. So that I feel very good about.
I think I totally agree with Preeti in the sense that I feel, to be self-critical, it's something that I have not done yet, and I think it's probably the next kind of stage of evolution as a writer, to be able to put yourself in the sort of shoes of the other sex. So it's definitely something that I want to do, sort of push myself to do in the future. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Umar.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to make one announcement. Umar's book, The Party Worker, is available for sale at the entrance of this hall. We'd also like to congratulate Umar for winning the Fiction Award for The Spinner's Tale yesterday. And that book is also available at the entrance, as well as Bilal Tanveer's book, which is titled The Scatter Here is Too Great. That is also available. Thank you very much. The next session in this hall will commence at 1:30. It will be the book launch by Sudhendra Kulkarni, and the title of the book is August Voices.
Oh, I have not seen you at all.